It was the kind of sound no farmer ever wants to hear, like the ground itself groaning in pain. On the morning of June 4th, 1901, just outside the quiet town of Dunn Hollow, Illinois, a section of pasture gave way without warning, leaving a sinkhole nearly 30 feet wide. Beneath the burned summer grass lay something much older than dirt, rotting wooden beams, rusted pipes and bricks blackened by smoke. At first, folks figured it was just an old cellar, maybe a bootlegger's hideout or a relic from the Civil War. But then came the smell, sweet and rotten, like lilies left too long in the sun. And then came the bones. The county surveyor stopped all digging when the first human jawbone turned up, still attached to a rusted head brace. Within an hour, they uncovered 6 more bodies, all adults, all restrained. The strangest part wasn't the bodies, though it was the corroded metal sign found beside them. Through the rust, one phrase could still be read: Riverside Sanatorium Est. 1877. The problem was, nobody in Dunn Hollow had ever heard of it. No records, no address, no survivors. But when journalists started digging, they found it marked clearly on several maps from the 1870s through the 1890s. Riverside Sanatorium Tuberculosis Treatment Facility. Somehow, a whole hospital had vanished from history. That's what brought me here. Over the next 18 chapters, we'll dig into a forgotten corner of America's medical past, through hidden journals, sealed files, and a web of documents pointing to one of the most disturbing experiments ever buried beneath American soil. By the end, you may question what memory and identity really mean. But before we begin, understand this. This channel isn't for everyone. Only the curious and the brave go further. We explore the stories the world tried to erase. If that sounds like you, subscribe and tell me, have you ever seen a place disappear from the map? Because this isn't a ghost story. It's worse. This is about a hospital that promised healing, but harvested something else entirely. This is the story of Riverside Sanatorium and the people who went in, but never came out. Within 2 weeks of the discovery, one thing became clear. The more people searched for Riverside, the more its absence felt deliberate. Daniel Mercer, a 32-year-old journalist from the Illinois Ledger, had covered mine collapses for years. He knew the difference between a clerical error and a cover-up, and this felt intentional. At the county office, the archivist didn't recognize the name yet. There it was on an 1874 township map behind glass, marked Riverside Sanatorium Tuberculosis Ward. But when Daniel checked property records, it didn't exist. Public health records from that era showed a strange note beside many tuberculosis deaths deceased under treatment at RS. No further information, no families notified, no graves, just initials RS. When Daniel checked old issues of the Dunn Hollow Gazette, there were no obituaries, no funerals, nothing. Instead, a repeated line appeared for over a decade. The family wishes to thank the authorities and care professionals for their support. The deceased has been returned to God's embrace through mercy unknown. Mercy unknown. It sounded like scripture, but it wasn't. Interviewing local families, Daniel found one woman who remembered the whispers. Mrs. Hauer, in 89, said her grandfather told her Riverside was where they sent those too far gone for prayer. He said the building could listen, she whispered. That it made you forget who you were. They didn't bury people from there. They just stopped existing. In the state medical archives, Daniel uncovered letters from 1882 between Dr. Arthur Fenn, a state health officer, and an unnamed administrator in Dunn Hollow. The final letter warned, "Your mortality rates are statistically impossible. I must insist on an in-person audit. Failure to comply will result in closure under Article 7, Section 3. There was no reply, only a slip dated 2 weeks later, with one handwritten word, deferred. The signature had been scratched out, but Daniel could still make out the name beneath Fenner. That name would come to haunt the next 16 parts of his investigation. When Daniel walked into the archives of the University of Chicago Medical Academy, the place smelled like old paper and disinfectant. He'd been there before chasing stories, but this time felt different, heavier. He was there to meet Dr. Walter Ulrich, a retired neuropathologist known for remembering things others wanted forgotten. And as Daniel would soon learn, some memories don't fade, they're buried. Daniel unfolded the old map and pointed to the faded rectangle labeled Riverside Sanatorium. "Ever heard of this place?" he asked. Dr. Ulrich leaned forward, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. His face changed, not with confusion, but with a recognition that carried weight. "Where did you find that name?" he asked quietly. Daniel explained everything: the sinkhole, the bones, the missing records. The old man listened without a word, then rose and walked to a locked drawer at the back of his office. From it, he pulled a thin, sealed envelope. "I shouldn't have this," he said. "It was supposed to be destroyed. But I kept it because I needed to remember." Faded ink scrawled across the top read, "Riverside 1883, internship notes. Do not file." Inside were 8 handwritten pages on university letterhead, written by a medical student named Paul L. Becker. The handwriting was uneven and frantic, the kind of script written by someone whose hands couldn't keep up with their fear. The first entries seemed ordinary notes about patient diets, herbal compresses, and basic respiratory therapy. But halfway through the 4th page, everything shifted. "They call it the reflection chamber," Becker wrote. A windowless room with metal walls and a single chair. Patients go in alone. Some think it's for imaging, others for prayer. But something happens in there. Their voices change. Their words don't match their eyes. He described watching a patient speak in fluent Latin, then scream in perfect Russian. The writing grew more erratic. Day 41. I asked Dr. Fenner about the tone they played during the sessions. He told me it wasn't a tone, it was a memory. Day 43. Patient 12 described a fire in a city he's never visited. He knew the street names. I checked. They were real. Day 47. The patients aren't sick, they're empty. The final line chilled Daniel. They told me I was next. Daniel looked up. Did Becker survive? Dr. Ulrich's face went pale. He was found wandering near Rockford 5 months later. No name, no memory. They called him John Doe, 47. He died in 1912. They said he forgot how to eat. Daniel swallowed hard, and Fenner. The professor pulled down an old leather ledger. Julius Fenner, expelled from Heidelberg in 1866. Reappeared here 2 years later under special ecclesiastical clearance. Founded Riverside soon after. Daniel frowned. Clearance from who? The Brotherhood of St. Malthy's, Ulrich whispered. A private medical order. Supposedly disbanded long ago. As Daniel packed up his notes, Ulrich put a trembling hand on his shoulder. There are stories, Mr. Mercer, that don't want to be told. Riverside didn't just vanish, it consumed everything around it. 2 days later, Daniel got a telegram. Dr. Walter Ulrich was dead. The coroner called it heart failure, but one line from the police report froze Daniel where he stood. A witness said Ulrich's last words were, "It's back, and it remembers me." A few days later, a plain wooden crate arrived by train, addressed only from St. Joseph's Mercy Library Archives, Peoria. Inside was a stack of medical records and a small card that read, "You're asking the right questions. Start here. W." Daniel spread the documents across his apartment floor. Dozens of patient files from 1872 to 1883, all stamped Riverside Sanatorium. Most were respiratory cases, tuberculosis, bronchitis, pleurisy, but the details began to repeat. The same names appeared again and again over the years: Michael Renner, Agnes Weller, Samuel Griggs. Each with identical symptoms, identical outcomes, and each signed by the same initials, J.F. Julius Fenner. It was impossible. Either the records were forged or the patients were being reused. Then Daniel found a file that made his stomach drop. Name Paul L. Becker. Occupation student. Date of admission February 1883. Diagnosis: nervous collapse, auditory hallucinations. Outcome transferred to internal observation. Status unknown. The same name from the internship notes, the same handwriting. Becker hadn't just witnessed the experiments, he had become one of them. At the bottom of every file, Daniel noticed a strange hand-drawn mark, a circle with 2 dots and a line across it like a crude face. Beneath it were 3 Latin words: non redibis idem. He looked it up. You will not return the same. The phrase echoed through his mind as he sat surrounded by the scattered records. This wasn't paperwork. It was ritual. Riverside hadn't simply erased people, it had recycled them. And if that was true, then something inside that building had been growing stronger with every life it took. Daniel drove back to Dunn Hollow with a new map, one not meant for doctors, but for engineers, an 1879 geological survey. Near the western edge of the old county border, the map showed a faint outline labeled man-made substructure. Purpose unknown, entry sealed. The coordinates led straight to the property of Raymond Pike, the cattle farmer who owned the land where the earth had opened up. Daniel called ahead, and Raymond Pike agreed to meet him at dusk, more curious than cautious. I always figured that old cellar was from some mining outfit, Raymond said, as he led Daniel through the overgrown pasture. But the cows won't go near it. They always walk around. They reached the spot just as the sun melted into the horizon, bathing the field in red and gold. The ground was uneven patches of stone that didn't belong breaking through cracked earth. Raymond nudged a section with his boot, and a dull metallic clang rang out. Daniel knelt, brushed away the dirt, and uncovered an old iron ring set into a stone slab. Together they pulled. A heavy breath of cold air rose from below as the slab shifted, revealing a narrow metal staircase descending into darkness. The first few steps groaned, but held. The air wasn't musty like an old cellar. It was sterile, processed unnaturally cold. At the bottom, they entered a corridor lined with corroded brass plates and oxidized pipes. The architecture felt wrong for its time, industrial, but elegant, precise. Not the work of a small-town sanatorium, but something engineered. Daniel wiped grime from the wall and uncovered a single phrase engraved into the metal. Depth of internal reflection. Corridor C. What's that supposed to mean? Raymond asked. Daniel didn't answer. They pushed deeper, their flashlights slicing through the dark until they reached a steel door, warped but intact. Above it, stenciled in faded red paint. No admittance without cognitive clearance. Bolted beside it was a mounted map. Daniel's breath caught. The blueprint showed a complex network of rooms: observation wing processing cells, tone calibration room, echo recording bay, transfer vestibule, and at the center, Nexus room, core array. But someone had scratched into the blueprint long after it was printed, a small circle with 2 dots and a horizontal line, like the crude face from the patient files. Beneath it, the same Latin phrase: you will not return the same. This wasn't a hospital, Daniel whispered. Raymond stared at the blueprint. Then what was it? A factory, Daniel said quietly. The door gave way with a groan, metal tearing from rusted hinges. Beyond it, the corridor changed. The walls weren't stone anymore, but something smoother somewhere between metal and glass, humming faintly beneath their touch. The first chamber they entered was lined with built-in control panels, glass tubes, switches, rusted dials labeled Tone Variants, Group 2. The equipment wasn't 19th century, it wasn't even close. Some labels weren't in English and a few weren't written in any recognizable alphabet. Raymond stepped on a loose grate and a hollow echo rang out below. "There's more under us," he whispered. They pressed on. The next room resembled a hybrid of lecture hall and operating theater, curved seating, descending toward a pit barely big enough for one person to stand in. Above it hung a lattice of copper wiring and glass like a mechanical spider web. 4 massive speakers built into the walls pointed directly toward the center. Daniel brushed dust from a nearby panel and read, "Session record. Subject 94B. Stimulus frequency 412 Hz. Duration 43 min. Result: partial overwrite achieved. Memory lattice unstable." Raymond backed away, shaken. "This isn't medicine," he muttered. Daniel barely heard him. He was staring at a message scratched into the floor near the pit. "I saw her face. Then it became mine." They moved on in silence. The corridor turned sharply into what must have been a dormitory, rows of metal cots bolted to the floor, each fitted with leather restraints. Above each bed, mounted in the wall, were black ceramic plates facing the same blank stretch of wall. Daniel stepped into that space. His flashlight flickered twice, then went dark. Raymond's stayed steady. "You felt that?" Daniel asked. Raymond nodded. "Yeah, like something pulling behind my eyes." Neither spoke again for a long time. Not when they passed the glass cabinet filled with teeth mounted on metal stems. Not when they saw the mural scratched into the back wall, a face split down the middle, one side smiling, the other crying, both bleeding from the ears. And not even when they found the first nameplate lying beside a corroded desk. Dr. J. Fenner, Internal Direction Council. Beside it, a clipboard with a single sheet of paper. One question was written in faded ink. "How many versions of yourself could you tolerate if none were truly you?" Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. Because by then he understood the corridors below Riverside weren't just underground. They were inside. The sanatorium hadn't been built to cure the sick. It was built to contain the mind. The deeper they went, the clearer it became that healing was just a disguise for reprogramming. In a chamber labeled Registry and Orientation, Daniel found what looked like the intake office. A long counter divided the room, and behind it, rows of sealed filing drawers stretched to the ceiling. On the wall, a warped placard read, "Welcome to Riverside. Your healing begins today. Voluntary consent is the first step toward enlightenment." That same phrase appeared again and again in the patient files Daniel uncovered from the drawers. Subject 12A, Status Passive Compliance. Subject 14C, Status Mild Resistance. Subject 22B, Status Full Dissolution. Each form started the same way. Patient has expressed willingness to participate in cognitive alignment therapies in exchange for food, shelter, and spiritual restoration. Subject has no next of kin. The signatures were shaky, some barely legible, as if signed by hands that no longer remembered who they belonged to. Some of the signatures looked more like scratches than writing marks from people who'd never held a pen. One form wasn't signed at all, just a single red fingerprint pressed beside the line for consent. In a separate drawer labeled External Correspondence. They found the truth. Dozens of unopened letters addressed to Riverside, all pleading for answers. Dear Dr. Fenner, I was told my husband Thomas was transferred to your care. Please tell me if he's alive. Another read, to whomever it may concern, my daughter Sarah was taken to your sanatorium by the Sisters of Calvary. I was promised updates. None have come. She is only 15. Every envelope was sealed. None had ever been read. At the bottom of that same cabinet lay a leather-bound journal, its cover smooth from age. The first page read simply, Intake Roster Cohort 7. Each entry listed a subject code, apparent age, education level, compliance rating, tone frequency, and finally, reusability score. Daniel flipped through the pages. There were no symptoms, no diagnoses, no treatment plans, only patterns. Cohorts tested, recorded, recycled. Not patients' units. Raymond finally said what Daniel couldn't. They never volunteered, did they? Daniel shook his head. No, they were chosen. The only thing they volunteered was being forgotten. Behind the cabinet, buried in dust, they found a rolled chart painted on canvas. Concentric rings labeled Entry, Dissolution, Alignment, Replication, Integration. At the center, a phrase repeated 3 times. Your mind is no longer yours. That night, Daniel lay awake, the words looping through his head like a hymn, soft, rhythmic, almost sung. If everything they'd seen was real, Riverside wasn't a failed institution. It was a perfected one, a machine built to erase people, quietly turning disappearance into obedience. And somewhere deeper underground, the next phase was waiting. The tone calibration room was silent, as if even the air remembered what had happened there. Cables hung from the ceiling like veins, feeding into rusted speakers and cracked ceramic casings. At the far end sat a control panel, its glass gauges fogged, its switches frozen. The familiar symbol circled 2 dots, and a line was stamped into the metal plate. Beneath it, a single switch labeled Primary Feed, Audio Stimulus Channel 1. Daniel hesitated, then flipped it. A low hum trembled through the room. No lights came on, but something else did. From above, a faint click, then another, then a slow tone rising and falling like a breath. Static. And then a voice, thin, childlike. Am I still me? Am I still me? Am I still me? Silence. Then again, faster. The accent changed, the cadence off, like someone imitating speech without understanding it. Daniel's stomach turned. He switched to another channel. The speaker crackled again. This time a flat male voice. Identify baseline consciousness. Adjust tone variance. Subject unresponsive. Initiate overwrite. A scream followed, short, sharp, human. Then another tone, higher pitched, beautiful for a second, before shattering into static. Raymond stumbled backward, pale. That's not playback, he whispered. That's residue. Daniel turned to him. What do you mean? Raymond gestured toward the hanging coils. Magnetic echo. Strong enough current can trap sound in metal like fossils. You're not hearing a recording. You're hearing what the room remembers. The speaker now emitted a soft pulse, steady and alive. On a nearby table lay a notebook labeled Subliminal Alignment Studies. Inside were pages of experiments, Tone 73B. Subject exhibited language disassociation within 5 minutes. Tone 109C. Full motor collapse, temporary replication of host gestures. Tone 112D. Subject repeated code from previous patient. Crossbleed confirmed. Daniel underlined that word. Crossbleed. One sketch showed the human skull, the auditory nerve marked in red, connecting to labeled sections, memory, identity, speech, mirroring. At the bottom, scrawled in jagged handwriting, through the ear, the soul may be rewritten. Back in his motel room, Daniel woke 3 times drenched in sweat. Each time he could still hear it, the voice looping through his skull. Am I still me? Am I still me? And for the first time since entering Riverside, he wasn't sure he knew the answer. The name, Dr. J. Fenner, appeared everywhere, founder, director, architect of something unspeakable. Yet in every medical registry and archive, he didn't exist. No articles, no obituaries, just fragments erased or hidden. Daniel began tracing his past. In the archives of the University of Heidelberg, he found a letter dated August 1866 from Professor Ernst M. Weiss, Dean of Neurological Sciences. Effective immediately, Julius Fenner is no longer affiliated with this institution. His continued pursuit of consciousness replication and identity mapping is deemed medically unethical and spiritually corrosive. No further explanation, just exile. Daniel dug deeper this time into church records. If the university erased him, maybe the church had tried to contain him. Months later, an unmarked envelope arrived via an intermediary. Inside was a document stamped, Ordo Sancti Malfus, private clearance record. It granted one Frederick Ulianis an alias for Fenner ecclesiastical sanction to conduct experiments in soul hygiene and mind separation disciplines. The date October 1867 was 1 year after Heidelberg expelled him. The seal bore a lamb reflected in a shattered mirror. A handwritten note from Daniel's contact read, "The Order of St. Malthus was suppressed in 1870 for doctrinal heresy. They believed the soul could be divided, stored and replicated like scripture. Some members fled overseas. Fenner was one of them." According to land records, Fenner, now calling himself James Fenner Medical Missionary, arrived in Illinois by 1868. The following year he purchased a large plot on the outskirts of Dunn Hollow. The deed was signed not in ink, but in the same symbol Daniel had seen again and again, a circle, 2 dots, and a line. The mark of Riverside. The property Fenner purchased sat atop a natural underground cavern, which he described in the deed as essential to ventilation and acoustic experimentation. But Daniel knew better. Fenner hadn't chosen that land for airflow or geology. He'd chosen it because it could sing. The layers of limestone and quartz beneath Dunn Hollow were known for strange resonance patterns, the kind that could carry and distort sound in ways most people couldn't hear. He wasn't just building a sanatorium, he was building an instrument. At the back of the deed, Daniel found scrawled handwriting listing secondary contacts. M. Osborne, Logistics. R. Stein, Chaplaincy and Compliance. A. Calder, Tone Systems Engineering. The name Osborne made his pulse quicken. He'd seen it before, scribbled on the back of a metal cabinet in the tone room. Specimen 9B, Emotional Failure. Notes archived by Osborne. They weren't staff. They were engineers of identity. Daniel sat back staring at the page. Fenner hadn't disappeared. He'd been buried beneath a new name, a new purpose, and a new belief that a soul wasn't sacred, a mind wasn't permanent, and a person could be rewritten. And the word that kept appearing in Riverside's files: communion. Wasn't faith-based language. It wasn't ritual. It was a process. Down Corridor D, Daniel and Raymond found a narrow chamber that resembled a chapel. Rows of wooden pews faced a rough stone altar. Stained glass windows shimmered with abstract designs, no saints, no crosses, only spirals, eyes and faces with mouths erased. But the altar wasn't wood. It was stone fitted with metal restraints at its base. When Raymond pried open a compartment beneath it, he found 4 glass vials labeled Clarity, alignment, dissolution, silence. The liquid inside still glowed faintly under their flashlights, colors pulsing like trapped light. Behind the altar was a cabinet filled with parchment scrolls. Each was marked Communion Trials Session Logs 4487. Daniel unrolled one. Subject 17C, administered sequence C, clarity, alignment, silence. Subject exhibited mild resistance followed by ocular dilation and complete speech loss. Tone 91B sustained at 412 Hz. Subject began reciting phrases in French and Latin. Claimed to be watching through another window, another scroll. Session 62. Subject respiration ceased at minute 28. Neural speech continued for 11 minutes post-mortem. Verbal content matched. Subject 61. Cross persistence confirmed. Tone 114 initiated to terminate echo. Every log ended with the same phrase. The body accepts what the spirit denies. Alignment is mercy. Daniel's hands shook as he opened the final scroll in the drawer. Session 81. Control trial. Child subject. Only the clarity vial administered. No tone stimulation. Subject drew symbols in the air, repeated the name Margaret 37 times before stating, "I was you," before I knew me. In an adjoining room, Raymond found a drawer of black and white photographs. Each image showed a patient, mid-procedure, mouths open, eyes vacant, some faces distorted or erased altogether, as if the camera couldn't hold them. One photo bore a handwritten note. "Those who survive, forget. Those who remember, do not return." Daniel whispered. These weren't rituals. Raymond nodded grimly. They were calibrations. They found the 13th tone room by accident, hidden behind a partially collapsed corridor. A bent placard barely legible under corrosion read, "Tone Lab, Restricted Series. Authorized personnel only. Code 14. Inside was a circular chamber lined with 12 speaker towers, each numbered in Roman numerals and angled inward toward a 5-foot iron platform. At its center sat a small copper chair fitted with headgear and restraints. Above the platform, etched into the ceiling, were the Latin words, "Audi et elsir," listen and forget. But on the far wall was the real horror, a 13th speaker smaller sealed behind reinforced glass labeled only 13. Beneath it stenciled in red, "No subject survived past tone. Do not activate without termination consent." Daniel's voice trembled. Termination consent? What does that mean? Raymond swallowed hard. It means whoever sat in that chair and heard tone 13 didn't come back, not as themselves. They approached the console littered with rotting papers, session logs, frequency readouts, timestamps. Subject 38, full identity melt within 9 minutes. Spoken voices traced to previous subjects. Displayed knowledge of personnel files never shown. Tone 13, triggered cranial hemorrhage. Another log, subject 41, called for mother by name. Mother deceased, 22 years. Subject never met her. Expired before confirmation. The final page read, Subject 44 refused to speak after tone 13. Stared into wall and whispered, "You put me inside the wrong skin." Raymond found a set of audio reels labeled Tone Trials, Pre-Final. He threaded one through an ancient playback unit. The machine hissed, clicked, then began to play. A sequence of tones rose and fell harmonic and strangely beautiful until the 12th. Daniel's eyes watered not from sound, but from pressure like his skull was folding inward. The reel cut out before the 13th tone. In its place, a layered whisper. Do not let the 13th tone finish. Do not let it find your shape. Daniel tore the reel out with shaking hands. He didn't want to know what Tone 13 sounded like. Deep down, he understood it didn't just erase you. It replaced you, behind a sealed corridor marked Exit Transfer Logistics. They found a chained file cabinet sealed with wax stamped in the same familiar insignia, a circle, 2 dots, a line. Raymond pried it open. Inside were folders marked Release Authorizations. These weren't medical files, but bureaucratic memos, transfer forms, and confessionals records of people who had supposedly left Riverside. Subject 19. A. Released to 3rd Parish Shelter under observation. Status: low recall integrity. Cognitive patterns show mirror contamination. Recommended 6-month observation. Do not disclose prior affiliation. Subject 07C. Placed in civilian workforce through Ordo Mouthy's vocational network. No residual tone sensitivity detected. Mild identity bleed. Monitor for recursive dreaming. The 3rd record was handwritten, shaky, almost illegible. And in the corner signed with the initials J.F. Fenner himself. He speaks my thoughts before I do, says them softer, makes me forget which ones were mine. I think I was a nurse once, or maybe I watched a nurse, or maybe the nurse was inside me. They tell me I'm safe now, but my mirror says otherwise. The handwriting trembled across the page like a voice caught between 2 people. Daniel flipped through more entries, each one worse than the last. These weren't survivors, they were fragments. Pieces of minds sent back into the world, half emptied and half filled with something else. No follow-up. No safeguards. No acknowledgement that the people they'd treated were now walking contagions of thought. Then Daniel found a single document marked Recall Order. Rural Incident Case number 442. Subject 28B. Failed containment. Developed intrusive vocal echo in public. Spoke in deceased languages. Identified strangers by private family names. Subject detained and dissolved. Remains unrecoverable. Witnesses report mild tone contamination. At the bottom, scrawled in red ink, was a name. Becker. Paul Becker, the intern whose notes had begun everything. He hadn't been a witness. He'd been a carrier, from a separate box marked Parole Ward Requests. Raymond lifted another folder. His voice was barely a whisper. These weren't accidents, he said. They released them, spread them like echoes. Daniel opened one last file labeled Margaret Weller, Patient 12C. Discharged 1881. Inside was only a single drawing, rough and smeared in charcoal, 2 heads sharing one skull, one face smiling, the other weeping upside down, and between them, a jagged black crack. On the back, 5 words. She went out as me. Daniel's stomach turned. Riverside hadn't just rewritten minds, it had reassigned them. And those reassigned lives were still out there. Teachers, nurses, shopkeepers, fragments of the sanatorium living among the unsuspecting, unaware of what they really were. In the farthest corner of the underground complex, sealed by a heavy lead door, marked only with the letter. Ma'am, they found what could only be described as Riverside's heart. The chamber was circular, sterile, and lined with towering machines that looked more like printing presses than medical devices. Each one had a vertical steel frame shaped for a human body with jointed rods aimed at the head and spine. Above every brace was a thin glass plate veined with lightning-like etchings. At the center of the chamber stood a control throne surrounded by mirrors, a silver dial on its armrest, labeled Sequence Deployment Template ID. Inside the drawer, Raymond found thick black folders marked Mindprint Series, Alpha to Gamma, Project Goal. Isolate, capture, and replicate the identity lattice of high-functioning subjects for transfer into new hosts. Applications: education, obedience, conditioning, linguistic inheritance, memory relay. The files describe people chosen for intelligence or charisma, mapped through tone calibration and chemicals. Their minds turned into behavioral lyses, each one a code, each one playable like music. Mindprint 3C. Recited scripture in languages never learned. Mindprint 7A. Recalled blueprints perfectly. Mindprint 11D. Calmed children-induced compliance. The last report detailed Mindprint 12F. Margaret Weller, subject 12C. Her transfer failed. She began imitating others' voices before being reassigned. They weren't recording memories, Raymond said. They were manufacturing personalities. Daniel stared at the throne. It's not a hospital, he said quietly. It's a factory. Beneath it lay the final folder stamped, Session 185. The notes described a perfect transfer. Subject 61A now responded to the original's name memories and emotions. The original was terminated. Attached was a photo of a young man, calm, blank-eyed. On the back. The copy does not know it is a copy. Daniel saw the name beneath the redacted line, Paul Becker. The intern who once wrote, "They told me I was next." He hadn't been erased. He'd been replicated. The next room held proof. Riverside was only one part of something larger, foreign bank transfers letters and research memos stamped with European seals. Thalmer and Wolf, Ellery Research Trust Ordo Sanctimus, a global network funding identity control. Reports detailed shipments of organic samples and a summary, 213 subjects, 185 fatalities, 4 full Mindprint successes. Profits exceeded costs 100-fold. In the margin, a note circled in red. Expand to orphan populations, pliable minimal inquiry risk. Signed, M. Osborne. They weren't curing anyone, Daniel said. They were selling obedience. That night, Daniel and Raymond hid in a farmhouse, doors locked, lights off. But something felt wrong. The silence felt alive. Daniel's handwriting began to change. He caught himself thinking thoughts that didn't feel like his. He called his sister. "It's me, right?" he asked. She laughed, but never said yes. By morning, a letter slid under the door. Curiosity becomes complicity. The syndicate needs vessels, not witnesses. Attached was a photo of Daniel taken inside the Mindprint chamber. Raymond arrived holding his own note. "Will you run, or will you be what comes next?" Daniel opened his bag. Inside was a reel labeled 13. A note read, "Play it or don't. Either way, we'll know." That night he stared into a mirror as the reel hummed faintly in his lap. His reflection blinked half a second late, then smiled before he did. He hadn't escaped Riverside. He was what came next.